Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of AmiSights. My name is Lynn Ozer, and I will be your host today. We have with us Scott Eisenberg, the founder of Amherst Capital, which has been merged into another corporation, and presently the founder of Franklin Capital Partners. Scott, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate being here this morning.
Well, we're really excited to have you here. Scott has a really interesting background mostly in mergers and acquisitions, which is such a hot topic right now. I think Scott has been doing over, 75 mergers in the last, or more than that.
Yeah, it's probably more than that now. At some point, I've stopped counting, but I've been blessed to have worked on a lot of interesting assignments with a lot of interesting companies over the years. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was here at Multifunding. A lot of what we do is help finance business acquisition loans, and they're still calling it the silver tsunami, where the baby boomers are selling their businesses. And that's mostly the size that we're working on. We do see larger transactions, and I know the ones that you're working on are larger, but the basics, I would assume, are still the same with mergers and acquisitions, just a lot more zeros at the end, right?
Yeah, although actually the ones I'm working with, generally my clients are $50 million in revenue and down. So, there's actually probably a lot of overlap in our two worlds.
Well, that's even more exciting. I know that my son does what you did, and he works for a big bank in New York, and he says, "Mom, I do what you do, just with 12 more zeros." I said, yeah, that's basically true. So, of course, but you've been an investment banker, and that's what he is. And so I'm totally fascinated by it, besides the fact that I do it on a smaller scale. Scott, let's start back after you went to college and tell us how you got into this business. A lot of what I want to hear is, how did you decide to do it on your own? But let's start at the beginning.
Yeah, no, a great question, Lynn. So when I graduated, it was actually from graduate school. I went straight from undergraduate, where I got an accounting degree, got an MBA in finance, and started with Deloitte. This was in 1983, really coming out of the early 80s recession, which was really a rough time. Interest rates were sky high, unemployment was high. You had a prime rate in the high teens.
Yes.
People complain about 5 or 6% interest rates now. I mean, literally, people were paying 18, 20% for business loans, and unemployment was well over 10%. So it was a rough time period.
Sure.
And anyway, I started with Deloitte then. I spent a total 8 years with Deloitte. The last 2, I was reporting to a guy in New York working in Deloitte's national office corporate finance group. And that's really where I learned, the true basic skills of M&A. Well, it actually was a really exciting time period, and I got the ubiquitous offer I couldn't refuse. And I went to a small subordinated debt lender. This was a company where the old Chrysler company was our largest investor, and we were investing in innovative automotive technology companies and other technology companies, mostly in Michigan, which is where I'm based, and really small companies. This was kind of like really late stage investing for companies that generally had, most of the companies we invested in were like 1 to 10 million in revenue. Not startups, but companies that were, relatively small and had big growth potential. And anyhow, so that's where I became a direct investor, and we'll come back to that because I've invested in a lot of companies since then. But this was I was in my early 30s, and we cut my teeth. We did 22 deals in sort of like 3 years, and had a really great portfolio of investments. We sold that company, and so the buyer basically we were a 5-person company. The buyer kept one person, and the rest of us were got packages and were let go. And so I did some independent consulting, and ultimately was left with the choice of what do I do. The president of that fund kept saying, let's start something. And so this is kind of a crazy story. I got approached to join, and I'm not going to name the company for reasons you'll understand in a second.
Okay.
But it was a Fortune 500 company to be the director of M&A, reporting to the vice president of M&A. And it seemed really appealing. And I go and I meet with the current VP, and we hit it off fabulously. And I go through the next round of interviews, and I'm interviewing with the senior VP of the foreign operations, which is where they're going to hire everyone from, where we're going to do their acquisitions. And anyhow, this guy, everything that I said was a positive, he turned into negative. Oh, it's a bright day out. Oh, it's too sunny. Up was down and down was up. And so he asked me the most inappropriate question I've ever been asked in any interview, bar none. He asked me, so what are the 5 things your wife would complain about you?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, HR would be ditching him today.
Right.
You could never get away with that now.
Right. No. Well, by the way, he ultimately ended up getting fired about 6-8 months later. And I'm thinking, well, I got to come up with something, and I'm not going to talk about my sex life with the guy. So I said, I'm really bad with paper. I'm a pack rat, and I keep paper piles up. And that was the first thing I said all morning. That he's like, oh, that's great, that's positive. What else is there? And I didn't have anything else. And to this day, I wish I would have said to the guy, let's pick up the phone, call my wife, see what she says. But we didn't. I walked out of there. I called the president of the fund that just got sold, that I've been working with, and said, can we meet tomorrow? I said, if you want to, and we meet the next day. I said, listen, if you still want to do something, I'm in.
So that turned you right into an investor in your own company. Good for you.
Yeah, I just was never going to I kind of walked out of that meeting from the Fortune 500 company and said, I'm never going to let some, corporate jerk control my life.
Right.
And that lit the flame on the entrepreneurial spirit. And this was, subsequently, I've started 3-4 other companies, but this was, the first one, as everyone knows, is the hardest. And that we met the next day. We agreed we'd start something. And we started Amherst Partners, which was a boutique investment banking and restructuring firm. Just as a little sidelight, we won multiple transaction awards. We were Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalists, a couple times, and multiple different awards. We built it up to 20 people, and had a lot of fun. Did a lot of transactions, had a lot of clients, and it worked out really well. It was a lot of fun. He was older. He retired, and my partner, my co-founding partner, he retired in 2011. 2020, really we're confronted with not having a succession plan. We had 4 partners, and we ended up taking effectively half the firm, merging it into a national firm called Capstone Partners. Great firm, national firm, very upmarket in the transactions, and I thought that was going to be, a great landing pad for our team. Turns out they end up selling to a bank. Great transaction for the Capstone team. Turned out it was not very, it really didn't fit for me. A lot of restrictions on what we can do and can't do, and bureaucracy and regulation, and it's not a place for an entrepreneur.
No, it is not. I think that's a good way to describe a bank. There's not a whole lot of entrepreneurial spirit there. It's very corporate, and it's very regulated, so I get it.
Right. Yeah, so I ended up taking a package at the end of 23 and then started my current company, Franklin Capital Advisors, which again is doing, small, lower middle market mergers and acquisition and restructuring. Those are my 2 buckets, and it's been a little over a year now, and I'm having a blast, and it's been really fun.
That's great. How many people work for you?
So I'm the only full-time employee. I have a number of contractors that I use, and it's kind of interesting because I've got several different assignments pending, and I got different teams lined up for each one, and So right now I'm the only full-time person, but again, I've got a kind of whole cadre of people that I'm using on different assignments.
So tell me, when you are taking on a new client, what is it that you look for? And you represent the sell side or the
Yeah,
buy
so
side, aren't you fine?
on
Tell me.
the M&A, yeah, on the mergers and acquisitions, 98% of the time it's going to be sell side. So I'm really trying to evaluate several things. One, is the business sellable? That's first and foremost. Is it sellable? And then there's a whole set of factors that go into trying to assess that. Probably the most important thing is there a good commercial opportunity for a buyer if someone buys this? Second, who's running the company and how is it going to be run, and is there how would that transition look? And it's kind of interesting. As a side note, I believe every company can be sold. It's just a matter of what price. And so I'm an investor and a board member of a company that candidly is extraordinarily mediocre, and it just sold. It closed December 31st. It just sold, and we were really lucky. We got a big payday on this company because of one big contract they got several years ago, and it was really profitable, and everyone got all their money back in a good return. You take that out, that one transaction, that one assignment for the company out of the equation, it would have been a very mediocre performing deal. But it sold. But it sold at a fairly low price. So because the company just, the prospects of the company weren't that great. So there's a price for everything. And so that's when you say, is it sellable? One of the things you're trying to understand is what price is it going to sell at? And so, who would buy it? Who are the buyers? And then the other thing is I'm trying to assess, do I want to work with this person? With the owner. Is this someone that I think will be honest, that can convey trust, and because you invest an incredible amount of time into a sale process, and we always get a retainer, but 90% of our compensation is on closing. Right. So from our perspective, the economics are, for us, we get paid when it closes. So you want to know that that you can get over the goal line with right. the person and the company.
Okay, that's really good information for people that are looking to sell their business. So when you are doing a transaction, are you working with individual owners? Do you ever work with private equity firms who are looking to build their portfolio, or you look at the entrepreneur and then say, you'd be suited for private equity investment?
Yeah, so typically I would say, 80-90% of my clients are individually owned, entrepreneur-owned businesses.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm working with the entrepreneur. So the question that you raised, Lynn, which is a great question, is really who's the right type of buyer for the client? And is it a strategic, a corporate buyer? Is it a private equity? And those are generally the two type of buyers. We break them up into, financial buyers and, strategic buyers.
Right.
And so the question that plays into it, what's the objective of the entrepreneur that's selling, and why are they selling? Right. So I had one guy whose objective was, I'm going to be on my boat May 1st. And you know what? He was on his boat May 1st. It's kind of a funny story. He promised the buyer 6 months with a transition time. Right. It took an extra month to get the deal closed. They asked and said, can you make May 1st, June 1st? He's like, no, I'm going to be on my boat May 1st. So it really depends on what the objectives are. Yeah. There's a lot of entrepreneurs like what I call the second bite at the apple, because they believe their business can grow tremendously. In those, and you sell to a private equity firm, a lot of times they will ask the owner to roll 20, 30% or some number of their equity into the new company. So if you have a business that's worth $10 million, you get $7 million at closing, $8 million at closing. You take $2-3 million and you put it into the new company, and you're still running it. And they give you the resources to grow. Maybe it's through acquisition, maybe it's organically, and then 3, 4, 5 years later, you're going to sell it again, and hopefully you're going to sell it, for $20-30 million, 3, 4, 5 years later.
Right. But for someone who really wants to be on their boat in May, this is not the best idea for them. Do you see like family-owned businesses, let's say, that would prefer like for generations to go into a private equity? So they put the 25% in, and that's for the next generation to have ownership in something that could be even bigger? Is that a motivation to do that?
Yeah, that you see all the time. It's it's ultimately, if someone wants to maximize cash at closing, you're selling 100%. And so if you're willing to say, I'm good with 70 to 80% or some number thereabouts, and I'm good with that amount, and I want to still be involved. And by the way, you don't necessarily have to be the person running it. You might say, I'll be the CEO for a year, and then I'll be kind of like an advisor to the CEO, and I'll still be an investor. I'll be a board member. I'll be active, but just not running day to day. That may work as well.
Right.
But if you want to be on your boat, you want to be done in 6 months to a year,
Right.
and you want to cash out, you're probably more likely to be better connected to a strategic buyer as opposed to a financial buyer.
Right. So when you talk about a strategic buyer versus a financial buyer, besides rolling over your equity, the value of the company is the value of the company, right? Whether you're selling it and rolling over some of your equity, or you're cashing out. Is that correct?
Yeah, but there's
Okay.
value
You
is
tell.
value's not if you're selling a piece of art, the value is arguably the highest bidder, right? But a museum may pay X price, a private collector may pay X plus 20%, and if you own that piece of art, you may say, I want that piece of art to be in the public domain. And so every seller has certain goals and objectives, and every offer isn't always the same. So by way of example, you can have one buyer say, I'll pay you, I'm just going to make up some numbers, I'm going to value the business at $10 million. I'm going to pay you $6 million in closing. I'm going to give you a $3 million note and a $1 million earnout. And someone else will say, I'll pay you $9 million cash. And I wouldn't begrudge anyone for either choice. Either choice has upsides and downsides. And
Right.
so there's risk and rewards to either one. And I wouldn't say anyone's wrong for choosing something. And so the structure really matters, the form of the compensation. But I'll tell you what matters more, in my opinion. It's not price. Is it the right fit? Are you selling to someone that you feel good about in terms of your legacy, your employees, and your business? Because that's going to matter. And to a lot of owners, that matters more. Their team members are like family to them.
Exactly. So when we're working with people, they always talk about multiple, and you want to sell for this multiple or that multiple. And it seems to me that every business, even though there may be a standard multiple, is going to be different depending on how involved is the seller that's exiting. Does the seller's departure play into the value of the business?
That's a great question. And first, I want to debunk the multiple myth.
Good, please do.
Yeah. Because the multiple myth that's a number someone can use around their country club. Yeah, I sold for 8 times. 8 times what? Is it last year's EBITDA? Is it adjusted EBITDA? Is it next year's EBITDA? How much growth do you have? And arguably, you get into all kinds of issues. So every industry is a little different in terms of how you see companies being valued. So, if a SaaS company sold for 7 times, 6, 7 times EBITDA, that might be light. Where a metal bending automotive supplier, if you got 6, 7 times, you probably get a really good price. And that still gets a multiple of what? Adjusted EBITDA, last year's, next year's. So there's a lot of folklore into the multiple. And I think you really need to understand what are the value drivers and ultimately driving into that value. But back to your question, is the owner sticking around help or matter or not? I love answering questions with, it depends.
No, okay. I like hearing this. Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends. So is the owner hands-on? And is it? I had one business I sold, and my tongue-in-cheek was, it was Tom and 18-year-olds. Tom had no management team. He had 18, 20 people out on the shop floor. Tom had the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't have anyone. He didn't have anyone to do anything else with. So a lot of people know Gino Whitman at EOS. He was the founder of EOS, and I helped Gino sell that business. Gino had a complete management team in place. So everyone thinks Gino is this iconic, entrepreneur, and he is. And yet, he had a complete team in place. And so, in fact, in choosing the right buyer, one of the things he said to them was, in trying to determine who that right buyer was, he had a list of questions he went to every buyer with. And one of them was, you're going to ask me to be on your board. I'm not going to be on your board. You're going to ask, I'm willing to roll equity. I'm willing to help out this amount of time per year and do this and that, but I'm not willing to be on your board. Are you good with that? And the answer was yes, check. Move next question. And so the multiple, the value of the business, and I give two polar opposite extremes, two polar opposites. So for Tom and his 18-year-olds, there's no Tom, there's no business. In the case where you have a very developed management team in place, the owner can be less involved and go on to do other things.
A lot of small businesses, that's the case. They don't have all the succession going on. But aren't there times where they really, if someone in a similar industry wants to buy their competitor, don't they want them going?
So the best buyer is one who's really arrogant and thinks they can run the business without you, and is willing to pay for it. That's the best buyer. Yeah, that doesn't always exist.
No, I guess it doesn't. Right now in 2025, are there certain industries that are changing hands more than any other industry? Do you see that or not?
Yeah, there are definitely cycles. So, and it's interesting, I don't work in the biotech industry, but my son's a Wall Street analyst for a biotech company. He does biotech research, and that industry's in the doghouse right now. That industry's in the doghouse. There's not a lot of M&A activity in that. And there's cycles in industries. So, solar had a really big run over the last couple of years. I think because people are starting to get very concerned about global warming and whatnot. I think circular economy type companies are hotter right now. I think alternative energy, I don't know if it will change under the Trump administration, but there was a lot of support for those industries under the Biden administration. So there was, so those industries were hot. SaaS and technology companies have been hot for a pretty long time. The automotive supply has been very challenged. Manufacturing has generally been a little more challenged. Things ebb and flow without no question. Things ebb and flow in terms of what's hot and what's not.
Yeah, that's interesting because we see different industries that are going that way. Have you ever sold or been involved in the sale of an online business? E-commerce in particular. We get a lot of requests for that. And I'm just
Yes.
curious. Some are, I don't know how to explain it, they make me nervous. Let's put it that way.
So, it's really interesting. I sold in the whole .com era, a number of small interactive media web development companies when this was all emerging technology.
Mhm.
And I just scratched my head at those prices being paid for those companies back then, because these were basically just consulting businesses selling for 2, 3, 4 times what they were worth.
Right.
Not two, yeah. So the multiple was 3 to 4 times the value. Calculate the value of it, multiply 3 or 4 times, and that's what they were selling for. It was ridiculous.
Well, do you know,
Did,
to interrupt you right there, but why did that happen? I mean, it's
because it
history.
was hot.
What?
It was hot. The market was
But,
on fire for those. It
but
was
for what
a
were they
hot trend.
getting? I don't understand.
Well, everyone thought they were getting these companies that were going to explode in
Explode.
growth. Yeah, and these companies were doing really well. I remember I sold one, little, it, maybe 25, 30 employees. Maybe it was doing 2, 3 million in revenue. I sold it for $10 million. And 4 25-year-olds, and they put $10 million
Right.
in their pocket. And one of the 25, he wasn't even 25. The guy couldn't go, in some states, you couldn't go rent a car. Yeah, yeah. And so, and then a year or two, I remember like a year afterwards, the principal of the company said, "You didn't sell us for enough money." And then because it was the height of .com, and then everything fell apart. And a year later, it talked to me. He goes, "Yeah, you were right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of smoke and mirrors here, and
That's what it
and
was. It seemed to have been smoke and mirrors.
yeah."
So,
So in these e-commerce companies,
yeah.
back into your question, so I'm an investor in board share. This is one of the companies I helped put together. I put together an investor group that bought a company that sells refurbished IT equipment, mostly servers and workstations. So we take a server, a 5-year-old server, tear it apart, harvest off the RAM and the CPU and the guts, if you will, and put in new guts, sell it as good as almost new. And you can get, interestingly enough, you can get 80, 90% of the computing power for 10, 20% of the cost. And it's a great value proposition. And it's a lot of people don't need leading edge technology in their servers and workstations. And so, you can save a lot of money on that. And particularly as servers get a lot more expensive with all the AI technology, it used to be a high-end server was 10, 15 grand. Now they're 35, 50 and going to 100 grand. So it's getting really expensive. So you can buy, buy for $2, $3, $4, or $5,000. You can get tremendous computing capability. So anyhow, this company sells, other than the parts it wholesales off, the finished units are all sold online.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all, I'm real familiar with the online selling process, the metrics, and the sustainability of those and repeatability of that revenue and the ratings and all that. And a lot of these online sellers don't have any of this. So they don't have good SEO. They don't really support their brand right. They don't get good traffic. They don't have great reviews. And I look at what this company is doing, and it's this company's real, and give order of magnitude, this company sells 20 some odd $1 million a year of products. It's the real business with to support and drive its online revenue and using real tools. And those are the things I would look at for an online seller. What's the sustainability? What's your edge? What's use the term in our industry? What's the moat? The moat around the business, what protects you so that this business, is sustainable and repeatable.
Sustainable and repeatable. That's good advice. So
Yeah.
for our listeners who are out there and they're thinking about, wow, this could be the time to sell the business. When do they contact you? At what point in their decision-making process?
So it's interesting. The overwhelming majority contact like a month or two, a couple of months before they want to start a process.
Okay.
And it's like, yeah, I want to sell. The process takes 6 months to a year.
It does.
To run a good process, plan on 6 months to a year. So if someone wants to sell in 2025, they pretty much got to get going fairly soon. If you don't start by March, the odds of closing in December start going down, each week that passes. So it's important to be out in front of it. And so most people start that conversation. I'm thinking of doing this, and they kind of want to get going. And to me, the more planning you can put into it, the more you can do things to say, get the business ready for sale. Maybe you got your financial statements, your financial reporting function isn't really strong. You can fix that. Maybe you've got a couple of customers you kind of are trying to get contracts in place, and get those contracts in place. Estate planning, maybe your estate planning is in place, maybe it's not. There's a lot of things you can do to plan. And so ideally it would be, 6 months to a year. I have one guy I've been talking to for 3 years, and I think we're going to go to market, next quarter. And, part of it was, let's meet, let's plan, and let's pick the time that works right.
When somebody is trying to sell within their own company to somebody who works there, do you suggest that they work with someone like you, or is it easier for them just to transition without outside assistance?
I actually think you always should have someone advise you, and I'll give a couple of reasons. First of all, what's the expression that I think they use it with lawyers? A client who, person who has themselves as a client's a fool, or something.
Right,
The expression
exactly.
is.
Yeah, as a fool for a lawyer. Yeah.
Yeah. There's two things. One, there's some aspects of selling a business that's a zero-sum game. I get more, you get less. You pay a higher price, I get more, you got more you get a higher purchase price to finance.
Right, exactly.
That's zero sum. And there's others that are there's some times where there's some stressful negotiations. And I think the owner should separate themselves from their team that's trying to buy the business.
Right.
And it's also, I can't tell you how many times I've made just a minor tweak and something in it, like, as I say, paid for myself in like 1 5-minute thing. And on one business, we were going to counter the buyer at X price. And when we called the buyer, we said, good news, bad news. Good news is you're the right buyer. Bad news is your price isn't high enough. They started gushing, like how we're so excited. We really want to do this deal. I put the phone on mute. I looked at my colleagues and said, let's raise our counter $500,000. And we did. So we went off script. They basically just met our price. So in a quick 2-minute audible, we generated another $500,000 of purchase price. I paid for my fee in a 2-minute audible.
Right.
Everything else was free.
That's really kind of an interesting turn of events, let's say. Scott, I have another question for you. Do you ever work with companies that need to sell versus want to sell?
Lynn, that's a great question. And say, fortunately or unfortunately, yes, I have worked on a number of what I call distressed transactions where someone needs to sell. And usually those are driven by banks, other investors, where things aren't going well and it's time to call it a day. And those are much different transactions, as you can imagine, for a lot of reasons. First of all, there's a lot more stress. Time is of the essence. A lot of times it's referred to as a melting ice cube that you're selling because you're either losing customers and actually that my very first transaction that I worked on solo was my wife's father, who was a doctor and died unexpectedly. Try selling a medical practice with no doctor, where the patients are leaving every day. Stress isn't working on a 10, 20, $50 million transaction and telling your client it's not going well. Stress is going home and telling your mother-in-law and your wife, whose loved one just died, that the transaction's not going well. That is stress. So,
Gosh, yes, I'm sure.
Yeah, so these distressed transactions, they're usually you're selling them in 60, 90, 120 days. There's no 6 months to a year. You don't have time. No one's funding the company, and you've got to get to the goal line on it. And so these are much more intense, and it's not going to be as comprehensive of a process as you do when you run a full year process. But you ultimately your objective is get this done, get it done right, get the best price you can within the confines of the time frame you're working with.
Right. So when you're working with these stressed sales, is it usually the owner who comes to you, or like you said, it's usually the bank or the investors who need to get out?
It's usually the investors or the bank that are driving the process, but the
Right.
owners, they let the owner, run, go find a firm. Actually,
Right.
you'll appreciate this. One of the assignments I had a guy where a bank told him he has to sell. And he went through his process and he interviewed a few firms. He called me and said, hey, appreciate your time, but, we're picking someone else. I said, thanks, I appreciate it, but by the way, I don't think you're really a seller. And I said, and I don't think you need to sell. And we talked through it, and I said, I think we can refinance you, but you got to fix a few things in the business. The punchline of that is we refinanced the business with an SBA lender, by the way.
How about that? Yeah, that's great.
we refinanced the business, and he made the changes he had to. He refinanced it, and this is, by the way, it was probably 22 years ago. His son still runs the business.
That's
His son took over. Yeah, this is a great success story. But it took someone who understood that no, you don't need to sell. Here's another alternative. So it takes someone to be savvy enough to understand that. And ultimately, no one else that talked to him, everyone else says, yeah, I'll sell it for you. I'll sell it for you. And I was like, no, I don't want to sell it for you. But there's times where where you really truly have to sell, and the owner a lot of times may not be getting anything for it, and that can be a very tough pill to swallow.
Oh, sure. Well, it's awesome that they know out there that there's someone who's looking out for them and may be able to help them, keep their business and make it thrive again. Well, that's just great news. How should our audience find you? People who are thinking about it, and the sooner the better is the message that I'm getting.
Yeah, and the sooner the better is to have the conversation when you're thinking about it, not sooner like you got to sell now, just for clarity. Everyone has the right time for them, whenever that is.
Right.
And it's just so you can properly plan. So it's Franklin Capital Advisors. I'm on LinkedIn. My email is seisenberg@franklincapital.us, and my phone number is 248-789-2860. Happy to chat with anyone about what they're thinking. And by the way, if someone's not for me, I will tell them I'm not the right person, and will always help point them in the right direction. I've got a great network of other people who do what I do, and would happy to point someone in a different direction if we don't think we're a fit for whatever reason.
I've learned a lot, and I think that our audience who's thinking about selling their business have also gotten great tips. You have a very interesting background, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much for being with us, Scott.
Thank you, Lynn. It was a lot of fun, and glad to participate today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.